Listen up, folks. This is a story of a young, ambitious woman named Amy Jo Wroe Betchel. Amy was a talented and an ambitious young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Born in 1972, Amy grew up in a loving family in Wyoming and developed a passion for running at a young age. She excelled at the sport, eventually becoming captain of the cross-country and track teams at the University of Wyoming and setting a school record in the 3,000 meters. After college, Amy continued to compete in regional and national competitions, including the Boston Marathon, and dreamed of qualifying for the Olympics. In addition to her athletic pursuits, Amy worked as a personal trainer and was happily married to her husband, Steve Bechtel, a rock climbing enthusiast. Together, the couple had recently purchased a house in Lander, Wyoming. On July 24, 1997, 24-year-old Amy Betchel went for a run in the Shoshone National Forest near Lander, Wyoming, and vanished without a trace. As the police began to suspect foul play, Amy's husband, Steve, became a key suspect. Amy and Steve Bechtel had been married for a little over a year. The couple moved to Lander because of its rugged terrain, which made it a perfect training ground for both activities. On the day of her disappearance, Amy had a busy schedule ahead of her. Her husband, Steve, had left for rock climbing in the morning, while Amy taught her fitness class. After completing her errands, including calling the phone company, getting the gas turned on, and purchasing home insurance, Amy planned on mapping out a route for 10K mountain run. In the evening, Steven returned home to find that Amy had not yet arrived. Though he wasn't initially alarmed, as it wasn't uncommon for Amy to have long days. His worry grew as the night wore on, and he still hadn't heard from her. Eventually, a search was launched and Amy's car was found on the side of the road in an area she often went running were her keys, sunglasses, and a to-do list inside, but her wallet was missing. There was no signs of struggle or injury, and Amy was nowhere to be found. The search for Amy began in the early hours of July 25, 1997, just a few hours after her husband Steve reported her missing. Initial efforts were led by Steve and about 24 of his friends, but within a few days, the search had grown to include more than 100 volunteers. They scoured a 30-mile radius around Lander, Wyoming, using ATVs, dirt bikes, horses, helicopters, and even dogs in their efforts to find Amy. The terrain was challenging, with rugged wilderness that made it difficult to search on foot or by vehicle. Despite their efforts, however, the searchers were unable to find any trace of Amy. In the aftermath, Fremont County Sheriff David King accused Steve of knowing more than he was saying. He suggested that if Amy had been out for a run and nothing else had happened, she should have been found. However, given the lack of clues and the circumstances, he believed it was unlikely that Amy was still in the forest. Steve was shocked by the accusations and asked for legal counsel when Sheriff King requested that he take a polygraph test. His attorney Kevin Spence advised against it, stating that polygraph tests have a high rate of false positives, and it would be an injustice to Steve if he was wrongly accused due to a faulty test. During a search of the Betchel home, authorities confiscated a series of journals kept by Steve since high school. Some of the writings were deemed incriminating by Sheriff King, including writings about power and death, and even some about killing people. Despite the evidence against him, Steve maintained his innocence and pointed out that the journals were just a form of self-expression, not a depiction of actual thoughts or action. As the investigation into Amy's disappearance continued, Steve and his attorney accused the police of focusing solely on Steve and ignoring other potential leads. They pointed out that there were several registered sex offenders living in the area and argued that the police should have been investigating them. As the investigation into Amy Betchel's disappearance continued, the focus remained on her husband Steve. The discovery of his violent and disturbing writings had made him the primary suspect in her disappearance, and despite his insistence on his innocence, the evidence seemed to point towards his guilt. But there were also inconsistencies in the witness accounts that suggested Steve may not have been involved. The witness who claimed to have seen Steve's truck on the mountain road where Amy's car was found also stated that she saw the truck at the search site the following day. However, phone records indicate that Steve was at home at the time the witness claims to have seen the truck. As the days turned into weeks and then months, the search for Amy continued without any leads. The case went cold, and it seemed that the truth about what happened to Amy would never be known. But then in 2002, a break in the case came in the form of a letter. The Freeman County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous letter that claimed to have information about the disappearance of Amy. The letter stated that Amy had been abducted by a serial killer who was also responsible for several other murders in the area. The letter claimed that the killer had taken Amy to a cabin in the mountains where he had kept her for several days before murdering her and disposing of her body. While authorities were initially skeptical of the letter's credibility, they decided to follow up on the information provided. They searched the cabin mentioned in the letter, but they did not find any evidence to support the claim that Amy had ever been there. However, they did discover several items of interest, including a map with markings that appear to be related to other murders in the area. They interviewed several individuals who had lived or worked near the cabin and began to piece together a possible timeline of the events. It is still unclear whether or not the anonymous letter was a genuine lead or a hoax. Over the years, there have been other leads and theories about what happened to Amy. Investigators began to entertain the possibility that she may have been the victim of a serial killer, as mentioned. At the time of her disappearance, several women had gone missing in the region, and there were similarities in the case that could not be ignored. All the missing women were around the same age as Amy, and they all had long, blonde hair. Some even bore a striking resemblance to Amy. One person of interest was a man named Richard Matt. At the time of Amy's disappearance, Matt was living in the area and had a history of violence against women. In addition, he had the means and motives to kidnap Amy, as he was known to be involved in the criminal activities such as theft and drug trafficking. It is possible that Amy may have stumbled upon one of Matt's illegal operations and was abducted as a result. However, there is no concrete evidence linking Matt to Amy's case. Another theory was that Amy had run away from her life in Wyoming. Some people close to her suggested that she might have been unhappy in her marriage and that she had talked about leaving. However, those who knew Amy best say that she was deeply in love with her husband and that she had no reason to leave. So did a serial killer possibly murder Amy? One theory is that serial killer Dale Wayne Eaton, also known as the Great Basin Killer, was responsible for her murder. Eaton's brother and sister-in-law reported that he was camping in the Burnt Gulch area at the time of Amy's disappearance. Eaton had a history of violent crimes, including the attempted kidnapping of a family a month after Amy went missing. Shannon Breeder, her husband Scott, and their 5-month-old baby Cody were traveling on Interstate 80 when their van broke down. Eaton offered to help and pulled the gun on the family, demanding that Shannon drive himself into the desert. But Shannon managed to outsmart him and the family managed to escape. Eaton was later convicted of the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Lisa Marie Kimmel in 1988. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection in 2004, but his sentence was later commuted to life in prison. Despite the evidence against Eaton, the police do not believe that he was involved in Amy's disappearance and believe that Eaton was visiting his niece in Colorado at the time of her disappearance. As the years have passed and Amy remains missing, her family and friends never gave up hope that she would one day be found. They continued to search for her and to raise awareness about her case, hoping that someone would come forward with information that could bring her home. Despite their efforts, the case of Amy Jo Wroe Betchel remains unsolved. She is still missing, where her fate remains a mystery. Was she taken by someone she knew, or was she the victim of a random crime? Or did she really run away from her life in Wyoming, or did something more sinister happen to her? These are the questions that may never be answered, but for those who loved Amy, the search for the truth continues. Alright folks, as I sit here and think about the rugged wilderness of Wyoming, it makes me wonder what truly happened to Amy. You see, I used to live out there, and let me tell you, the elements can really turn on you even in the middle of summer. It's a harsh environment. It's not hard to imagine someone getting lost out there. And let's not forget about the grizzly bears. They're known to roam the area, and it's possible that Amy could have been attacked by one. Now, grizzlies are known to bury their prey, and between a grizzly bear and other wildlife, they would leave barely any remains. So as I wrap up today's episode, I want to remind anyone listening in the Lander area to keep an eye out for anything that might seem suspicious. And if you appreciate the story and the graphics that were created to provide a better visual, then hit that subscribe button as hard as you can to let me know you subscribed. I'm so close to that 1,000 subs, and I want to thank everyone who's helped me to get this far. Thanks for tuning in, folks.